All of these things under the hood are so confusing. How do you find everything? Wrenchy showed me how to check my oil, but I don't know about all these other things. Oh, Wrenchy, help me. You're my only hope. Of course. The old ways are the best ways. I should have remembered. Check your owner's manual.
Welcome back to Wrench Therapy, everybody. I'm David. Glad you're here. Heard from my buddy Wrenchy the other day that there's a lot of confusion out there about the other things underneath the hood that we need to take care of. We've already talked about the oil. Well, today we're going to talk about the 5 fluids that are under the hood besides the oil that you need to keep an eye on. Next week's video will be a finish of that, and we're going to talk about the things not fluid related, like air filter batteries, that kind of thing. But this week is all about the fluids. And after we get out into the shop, when we come back in, I'm going to talk about when we need to change the different fluids, how long their lifespan is, that type of thing. And don't forget, while you're watching, if you enjoy what you're seeing and you get something out of it, please hit the like button, please subscribe, and I love having comments from you guys. So grab your glasses, grab your gloves, let's get out to the shop and talk about those 5 fluids. Our subject today out in the shop is a 2003 Honda Civic sedan. And this is a good representative car for looking at the different fluids under the hood. So we can see several of them from this shot, and then I'll move the camera around and we'll look at the others. First one, engine oil. If you've watched the other videos, you know what to do with the dipstick. There's the cap, right side by side, nice and easy to find. On the back here is our brake fluid reservoir. Now, your car is going to have something like this, usually in line with the driver's seat. So this guy right here, the easiest way to see the fluid level is just shine a light behind it. And if you do that, you can see pretty much what the level is. And it will have markings on the side for full and low. We do not, as a rule, top this fluid off. There's a float inside here that will turn a light on the dash telling you when the brake fluid is low. It's a safety thing. It's also a good indicator when your brake pads or shoes are worn, because this fluid level is going to drop as your brakes wear. So we generally don't top this guy off except when we are actually doing brakes on the car. Once we're finished with the brake job, we'll make sure this guy is topped off. Now, this fluid should be replaced about every 3 years. We don't go by mileage, we go by time, because the nature of the brake fluid absorbs moisture and it ages out. Time-wise, it really doesn't matter about how far you've driven it. So this one should be every 3 years. And again, the information for that's going to be in your owner's manual. Over here, on this side, we have the blue cap. This is our windshield washer solvent. Some have a dipstick, some don't. I tell you what I do, I fill it all the way to the top. I don't even bother worrying about what level it is. Every time I'm under the hood and I'm doing anything with any of the other fluids, I just fill this guy all the way up. It's not going to hurt a thing. So that's just your washer solvent there. This one is our power steering fluid. And you can see that there are, well, it kind of can see, there are level marks on here. Shine it through the backside, you can see the fluid level a little bit better. Now this one is at the low mark, but that's because it's cold. Depending upon the car, it may have a cold and a hot level, or may have a low and a high. You would just fill it, pull the cap off, fill it. I've even seen some with little dipsticks in it. Key thing here, as with all our fluids, is make sure you're putting the right fluid in the right location. This fluid doesn't really have a maintenance interval. You kind of just go by the color. It's not generally stressed that hard, so I've seen cars go a long time on this fluid. It's not, we don't have any kind of regular recommended change interval on the power steering fluid. A lot of cars nowadays don't even have one of these because they have electric power steering. So it really will depend upon your car whether or not you have one of these reservoirs or not. And it could be located anywhere underneath the hood, but generally this guy right here is our power steering pump. So if you follow the lines, you'll get back to the reservoir. And you would add fluid right here at this cap. So we've had a camera shift. Now we're to the other side of the car. This is on the passenger side. We've got three things on this car that we want to look at from a fluid standpoint. We have our radiator cap, we have our radiator reservoir, and down there is going to be our transmission dipstick. If you have an automatic transmission, you may actually have a dipstick. Now I'm not going to be able to really show you because it's kind of buried, but I'll pull the dipstick out. And this is the same kind of thing we had with our engine oil. You're just going to have the same kind of hash marks. Let me make that so you can see a little bit better. You're going to have the same kind of hash marks on there, hot and cold, that kind of thing, high, low. Most transmissions we want to check when they're warmed up, but again, check your owner's manual. And if you notice, that fluid was cherry red. That is a big difference between that and our engine oil. The engine oil, of course, is going to be more of an amber color, but our transmission fluid tends to be cherry red. All right, so let's go to our radiator. Now this one is very important to make sure that your car doesn't overheat, and that can happen any time of the year. It doesn't just have to be summertime. We still put a lot of stress on the cooling system. Your radiator is responsible for the heat inside the car. The same fluid that's in the radiator is in a mini radiator inside your car called heater core. Same fluid. So if we're low here, we're going to be low inside there, and that's bad. So we always want to make sure that we're topped up. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to take this cap off, the main radiator cap. You do not want to take this off when the car is hot. This guy can be under a lot of pressure, and when you pop that cap, boiling water is going to come out and it's going to spray all over your legs and all over the car, and that's really a bad thing. So make sure you don't open this guy anytime the car's been running. This is where you want to do it, right here, and you're going to have a reservoir, depends on the car, but you're going to have a reservoir that looks, you can kind of see that, it's just a plastic tank, and it will have a fluid markings on the tank. That's where we top off any coolant, antifreeze, whatever you want to call it, okay? That's going to come into the reservoir, not the radiator itself. That's a big safety thing. Always do it in the reservoir, not in the radiator. Okay, you never touch this unless the engine is cold. So it's best to just top it off here. That's where the marks are on this tank. Again, it's hard, they're down here. Make sure you get yourself a good flashlight. You really need it sometimes to be able to see what's going on underneath the hoods. We tend to hide things in various places, so sometimes it's a little hard to find them. So you need a good flashlight to make sure that you can find stuff, read the levels, and get a good feel for what the condition of the fluid is. So that's the basics under the hood: oil, brake fluid, power steering fluid, radiator, transmission, and of course your washer solvent. Those are the main fluids that you have underneath the hood. Well, what do you think? Not too difficult, was it? Let's take a few minutes and talk about the various fluids that we looked at today. First one, brake fluid. Things to keep in mind: it's a very nasty fluid. It will damage paint. So you don't want to get that on any of the surrounding areas. If you have to add fluid for any reason, you'd want to make sure that that fluid doesn't get on paint and the rest of the stuff underneath the hood, because it will definitely damage that. So be very careful if you do have to add brake fluid. But generally, we don't add brake fluid. We let it go down, and when it gets low and the light comes on, That's when we're going to top it off, because generally that's when we're going to fix the brakes. Usually when it's low, it means we need to redo our brake pads or our brake shoes. So keep that in mind. If it goes low and those things aren't worn out, it means you've got a leak somewhere, and you definitely need to get it to a professional and get them to figure out what the problem is. All right, how often do we change brake fluid? Every 3 years. That's the general recommendation. It gets full of moisture, it gets contaminated, and it needs to be replaced on a calendar schedule rather than a mileage schedule. So every 3 years is a good one to go with. Power steering fluid, that's another one. Generally doesn't have a change interval. So you just kind of look at the fluid as it starts getting dark. You might want to have it changed, but that can go years and lots of miles. It's not a big deal. Just have your professional technician look at it, and if he thinks it's dark enough, then have him change it. All right, and that's a very easy thing for them to do. Washer solvent, fill it to the top. Every time you're under the hood, fill it up. That way you never run out. Really is no fun when your windshield's scattered with bugs and debris and everything, and you can't clean it because there's no washer solvent in there. So just, every time you're underneath the hood at your house, just fill it up to the top. Antifreeze, coolant, whatever you want to call it. Generally, that nowadays is about 5 years, but it changes with the manufacturers. I know Honda, it's about 5 years to change the coolant. Other manufacturers want it done in 2 or 3, so you really got to check your owner's manual on that one. And there are different kinds of antifreeze. Honda uses a blue one, somebody else uses an orange one, somebody uses a pink one, there's a green one that you're probably used to seeing. There's lots of different colors. It goes by manufacturer, so if you're putting exactly what's already in there, you're going to have to go to the dealership and get that manufacturer fluid if you want that. They are generally cross-compatible, but again, this is about a 5-year interval for most cars nowadays. Probably not something you're going to want to do yourself because it's quite messy and you got to dispose of the antifreeze. So that's generally, we leave that to the techs. You can do it. It's not horrible to do, but you probably ought to leave it to them. Just for the disposal aspects, because antifreeze is highly poisonous to animals and it tastes really good to animals, so they want to drink it and it kills them. So we don't want that antifreeze sitting out, used antifreeze sitting out to where an animal, your cat or dog or something, can get into it, because it's really bad. We just don't want to do that. Last fluid is transmission fluid. If you've got an automatic transmission, you may or may not have a dipstick, and that really depends upon the manufacturer. If you have a dipstick, owner's manual will tell you exactly how to change it or to check it and when. Some of them, the car has to be running, so you got to be very careful. Some of them, it has to just be warm. Others, they want it cold and off. It just depends upon the vehicle. There's just way too many ways for me to say specifically which one your vehicle would have. The change interval, again, it goes everywhere from 30,000 miles to we never change it. There's some manufacturers out there that don't change automatic transmission fluid at all unless there's a problem. So again, owner's manual is always going to be your best bet. If you have a manual transmission, same thing goes, but you're not going to have a dipstick. It's not something you're going to be able to check. You're going to have to put the car up in the air to get to it. It's going to be a drain bolt and a fill plug. You got to pull the fill plug out, stick your finger inside. You don't want to mess with that. Let the professionals do that. So if you got a manual transmission, you're not going to have to worry about that. Just look at the interval and keep an eye on that and change it when they have a recommended interval. Again, I've seen it as low as 30,000 miles. I've seen it as high as we never change it unless there's a problem. So it's really going to be vehicle specific. All right, that's the 5 fluids underneath the hood. Next week, it's going to be everything else underneath the hood, your battery, your air filter, and your belts and hoses. That's what we're going to talk about next week. I hope you come back. Hope you subscribe and you hit like and all those good things. I'm hoping you're enjoying it and you're getting something out of this and you're learning. That's always the key. Leave me a comment if you want, and I'd love to read them. Talk to you soon, everybody.